probably one of the important texts of the Western canon, which is the Iliad by Homer. And you'll find something similar in the Odyssey by Homer. You come across this principle of hospitality. The mark of honor of a people is to welcome guests and to do so with generosity. And that's something I've always felt that marks African custom. There's a word for it in Wolof, the teranga. It's the opening of a household to an outsider. We never refuse someone a calabash of water should that person be thirsty. And how sad it is to see in the world, particularly, I'd say, in Northern Europe and in parts of the Western world, a lack of generosity and openness when it comes to accepting other people. And the reason why I say that is because I was welcomed, cared for, and meticulously escorted here by your director, Mrs. Mochemi. And it just struck me that she's an incredible person to have put so much care into the detail of my coming here. And when I hear her speak, I see that she's also a formidable intellectual leader as well. So I think you're in very good hands, and I'd like to thank you once again for your welcome, Mrs. Mochemi. My name's Conrad Hughes. I'm from South Africa, proudly South African, as we say. Yeah. Africa's a diverse continent, and we shouldn't forget that. And South Africa is such an important country for our continent. And it really moved me to hear you singing Nkosi Sikeleli just a few minutes ago. God bless Africa. I was born in Johannesburg and grew up during apartheid, the system of iniquity which separated people because of the color of their skin and essentially gave the country to the white man. And my primary education was in a school where they would cane us. We called it getting caned or getting jacked. That meant getting hit with a stick, which I assume no longer happens in most parts of the world. In any case, I can tell you that the effect it had on me was twofold. First of all, I hated school with a passion. And secondly, about the only thing I could remember was the face and the appearance and the overall aura of the person who'd hit me. I don't think I recall anything from my primary school education. It was based on brutality, mindless discipline, and it was built on a system of inequity. Luckily for me, I went to a different school, which was in Swaziland, called Waterford Kamhlaba. Kamhlaba in Siswati means one world, coined by the famous King Sobhuza, one of the oldest African regions at the time. And that changed my life, because for the first time, I was learning with children from different origins. I was learning with girls and boys. The teachers wouldn't hit us. The teachers were there as coaches to help us learn. It gave me confidence. It gave me love of learning. What if it changed my life? I did the IB diploma. And so much of what I did in that part of my academic voyage has marked who I am today. The subjects that I chose. For example, I was doing very well in geography. I was getting a 7. And this new French teacher came along called Monsieur Usman. And he was very dramatic and used to throw his scarf over his left shoulder and write poems about the sound of his biting an apple. And we were all sort of drawn to him. And I went to him and I said, I'd like to be in your French class. But he was teaching French at the higher level. And I was learning French at a lower level, and I was getting a 4 out of 7. So my advisors said, you can't do French as a higher level. But I fought, and I said, I want to do French. So I wound up dropping geography and doing French as a higher level. And when I got my diploma, French was the worst score on my academic transcript. However, because of that, I went to study French in France. It essentially got me married, because I think that if you can't speak the same language as your partner, there's a problem. It's of vital importance in my work today, because I work in a bilingual institution. We know that bilingualism actually creates more neural connections in your brain than monolingualism. And it's been of fundamental importance. I also wrote my extended essay when I did the diploma program in psychology, the psychology of prejudice. And that's now become a book that I've published and a doctorate that I'm doing, and I'm about to finish with Durham. On Monday, I'll be doing my Viva for my second PhD. So wish me luck. You know, that's a sort of 2-hour oral exam. From South Africa, I moved to, this is Waterford, my school in Swaziland. I did my first degrees in France at the University of Montpellier. I did my PhD at the University of the Witwatersrand. And universities in South Africa are interesting to look at because what we're doing is we are problematizing the curriculum and asking for students in Africa to be studying much more African content. Because we need, in the 21st century, I think, to reappropriate some of the types of knowledge that are being taught in schools to forge a stronger identity. So I'm proud to be part of the University of the Witwatersrand. It's a great academic institution. And that taught me critical thinking, if you like. And Durham University, where I did my education qualifications, is really a place that's excellent at assessment. Assessment is such an important part of learning. How do we assess students? How do you get to find out if someone's good at something or not? What sort of feedback do you give to students? This is my school, just go back, the International School of Geneva, which is a magnificent school. We have over 130 nationalities, and the IB diploma was invented here in the late 60s by a history teacher who took our international history course to the London Triangle of Universities, had it recognized as an A-level, and shortly after collaboration with a number of other schools, such as the United Nations International School in New York and the United World College in Wales, we came up with the IB Diploma Program. And that's an image of the very first diploma being presented to a student in 1971 by Lord Mountbatten, who was the Viceroy of India. And he said of that moment, "This is my final contribution to the prevention of World War III." Because the whole idea of an international education from the start was an education for a more peaceful world, an education where those that go through it are empowered to act for good. These are some of my publications. Guiding Principles for Learning in the 21st Century, which we designed with UNESCO's International Bureau of Education. My book on prejudice, which was published by Routledge. And more recently, my book on educating for the 21st century, 7 Global Challenges, which is being published with Brill, Sense Publishers, and UNESCO International Bureau of Education. And some of my talk's going to be about this subject. What are the type of things that we need to be good at to thrive in the 21st century? So let's just think about the world that we're in. First of all, we are, for the first time in history, as I think we all know by now, cascaded by information. There's so much information and data out there that we have to invent new words to describe it, such as brontobytes. Ever heard of a brontobyte? Now, previously, of course, knowledge was protected and was difficult to access. But for the first time in history, the gates of knowledge have been opened. And young people can access knowledge just about anywhere and just about any time. And you have to ask yourself what we're doing in schools. Because if teachers are standing there broadcasting knowledge, you can probably get that information online. You could probably find a TED Talk or a recorded lecture that would be much better than what your teacher's doing. So we have to think differently about how we're presenting information. And we also have to have the capacity to sift through information with a lot more acuity and a lot more agility, because there's so much of it. We're in the 4th industrial revolution, okay? So society has gone through these waves of change that have been driven by technology. And of course, we went through the industrial revolution at the turn of the 19th century. That in the 20th century was really enhanced by computation. But what we're looking at now is the Internet of Things, intelligent systems, recursive machine learning, artificial intelligence, or what we call singularity, meaning that the extraordinary power that our brain can harness with its 3 billion neurons is actually being challenged by algorithms and machines. So we're in a completely different environment to the one we were in the 1960s. It's the 4th industrial revolution. And the landscape is one where we're faced with things like augmented reality, big data analytics. We've got tools that allow us to enhance just about any industry. You take the medical profession, it's completely different now because of scanning technology. The scientific method that came from Francis Bacon that we learn at school, where you start with a question, then you have a hypothesis, then you test it with a controlled and experimental group, you gather your results, you derive a conclusion, that's changing too, because we're able to scan masses of information and detect patterns, and then derive conclusions from pattern detection. There's a whole new way of thinking. We can come up with more accurate diagnoses and prognoses using simple algorithms than we can with human doctors. So we have to think about what makes us specifically human, and much more interestingly, how we're going to interact with singularity, artificial intelligence. What's important, of course, is the rate of change. It's exponential. Human beings understand linearity. Tomorrow will be much the way it was yesterday. I can predict what will happen in 10 years. But when you're faced with exponentiality, it's impossible to conceive of what the world will look like in the next 10 years. We have disruptive cycles of innovation and change that are becoming more and more steep, more and more frequent. So we're living in an era where change is the constant. And this generation of learners is riding on the cusp of radical change. So that rise in technological progress and in change, which is exponential, is something that we have to grapple with. We're also faced with environmental problems. We're using up about 1.6 planets. The global footprint that the near 8 billion people on this earth is laying on the planet is totally unsustainable. And if we don't change the way that we use the planet and our behaviors, and if we don't change it radically, we will destroy this earth. That could be through degrowth or through much cleaner technologies. So just about everything we do has to keep the environment in mind. If you go back about 100 years, the concept of the environment was infinite, whereas now we know that the world is much more fragile and finite than we ever thought it was. And there's something of a crisis in world leadership. If you look at what's happening in the United States, if you look at Brexit in the United Kingdom, if you look at the rise of extremist thought in Europe, we have a problem with moral leadership. Some of the great leaders of the world that have marked human culture are not on the map anymore. So we're looking to ourselves and to young people as people and agents of change who can reverse that situation, and not to speak to fear, to prejudice, to anger, but to speak to peace, to open-mindedness, to growth. That's so important. So the world we're living in is full of challenges, and it's a difficult place. But of course, it's full of opportunity as well, unprecedented opportunity. It's a world of VUCA. That stands for, it was said a few minutes ago, volatility. Things are volatile, they're changing all the time. Uncertainty. We don't really know what the future's bringing. Complexity. We're dealing with complex, interrelated systems at every twist and turn. And ambiguity. Things aren't straightforward. You have to look at them closely. A world of VUCA. We also have a concentration of power in the multinational, globalized, neoliberal system that governs the planet. And so the way that you consume, the things that you buy, the people that you work for, have ethical implications. And you need to inform yourself about those. Much of what we do is related to GAFA. GAFA stands for Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon. These are some of the fastest growing companies in the world. And they're tracking us. They are buying internet space. It seems almost impossible to survive without them. So we need to look at these models with some criticality. That's the crazy world of the 21st century, and what a fantastic place to be, because things are being shaped by young, brilliant people. Now, the work that I've done with UNESCO International Bureau of Education, and my school has done with them, has been on the types of competences that you need to thrive in this world. What is it that you need to be good at so that you can champion this world? And the way that we went about that was by looking at lots of research. Research done in academic institutions, by universities, independently, forecast studies. There's a lot of research out there that brings us to 7 global competencies. What is a competence? It's a unity of knowledge, of skill, and of attitude. It's not enough to know things, and it's not enough just to be good at things. You also have to have the right attitude, and you bring those together, you get a competence. So schools in the 21st century should be developing competences, not just knowledge, not just skills. And what are these competencies? Here's the first one. Lifelong learning. You need to learn all throughout your life. I think that's good news. For some students, that might sound like bad news. But you know, there was a time when people would go to school, they'd go to university, they'd get poached by companies after university, and that's it, you know. Then you're safe. Next stop, retirement. It's not that simple anymore. You can get outsourced by a person or a machine pretty quickly if you're not upskilling all the time. So you need to have a thirst and a desire to carry on learning all your life. And that could mean taking degrees, it could mean reading, opening your mind. You probably will be changing jobs much more than previous generations have. They say that the jobs of the future do not exist yet. And there's every statistical likelihood that you'll be changing your profession many times. That means you have to upskill. And you have to take an attitude with you that is, I'm going to carry on learning throughout my life. This is just part of the voyage. It doesn't stop when you graduate. Can you think of someone who represents lifelong learning? Think in your mind's eye of someone, a hero you have, a friend, a person who just keeps on learning. I'd like to suggest that one model is Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Why? This is why. Because he was born as a shepherd boy. He was also of royal stock, so he could have stayed in his county and been a traditional leader. But he chose to embark on an education. He stood for his moral principles. He was expelled from one school because he wouldn't take part in a corrupted SRC election. He went through his academic studies and then decided to become a lawyer. He went into political activism. He was imprisoned and carried on studying while he was in prison. And he took his law degree from the University of London while he was in prison. He was a lifelong learner because he then went on to become the first president of a free and fair South Africa. He was someone who managed an incredibly complex system of change, and he became an elder, a wise governor for the whole of humanity towards the end of his life. He spoke many languages, and he would always ask people, no matter who that person was, the doorman, a chauffeur, a CEO, head of state, how are you? He was naturally curious and interested. And that life-learning flame is one of the things that makes him so special. The most innovative companies, and some of them are those GAFA companies, are also the most successful companies in the world today because they're constantly looking. You know, Google, they employ what they call learning animals. They want people to be looking and searching further all the time. Next time you have an idea, or you're sitting with some friends, could be professional, and you're brainstorming, get the first layer of ideas, and then go back and say, think harder. Stretch your thinking. Come up with a more radical idea. Push. And you'll see, I guarantee you, the next set of ideas you come up with, some of them might be crazy, but there'll be some interesting ones in there that you wouldn't have come up with if you're just having lazy brainstorming. You've got to push your thinking. You've got to go further. Because linear thinking, knowledge-based thinking, predictable thinking, machines can do that. But what machines can't do is what we call higher order thinking. Synthesis, analysis, creative thinking, judgment. What a machine can't do is think ethically. So this is all part of what it means to be a lifelong learner. Another of the competences, the 7, we're on to say competence 2, self-agency. That means passion. That means drive. That means resilience. That means that you get out there and you push and you're not afraid. The world is not a place that's going to reward those who aren't willing to push themselves. And schools should be places where you have some agency, where you're taking decisions. Education isn't something that happens to you. You make education happen yourself. As the famous Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. A real student will learn more from a brick wall than a teacher, if you're willing to open your mind and really investigate. Self-agency is about grit. You have to push. So think of someone who you admire, who has that grit, that motivation, that resilience, who keeps going. Here's someone I could suggest. David Rudisha, incredible athlete. You know, he ran the 800 meters in 1 minute 40 and something. And for 17 years, the 800-meter record was held by Sebastian Coe. It was seen as unbeatable. It was actually beaten by another Kenyan shortly before. But Rudisha is a model of someone who has resilience and grit. If you look at his training schedule, he would run every single day, except for Sunday. And on a Thursday, he would do a 25-minute sprint. Now, it's not an Usain Bolt sprint, but imagine that, running as hard as you can for 25 minutes. That's the kind of resilience that you need to flourish in the world. Then you've got interaction. Now, we all talk about collaborating, working together, teamwork. The work we've done with UNESCO points to 3 different types of interaction. The first one is interacting with other people, because nothing can be done alone. You look at a computer. A computer can't be designed by a single person. There's a collaborative effort behind it. A single idea is always strengthened if someone else comes along and criticizes it and challenges it. So use the network of people that you have around you in this 21st century sharing economy. Interact with other people. Degrees will get you somewhere. Your personal attributes will get you somewhere. But your connections, your social network, the people that you meet are going to be of vital importance. There's a quote I quite like. It's a bit cheeky. It's from Winston Churchill. He says, "Be kind to the people that you meet on the way to the top, because you'll meet them on the way down." Now, can you think of anyone who's a real example of fantastic collaboration and interaction? This is someone that I could think of. Angelique Kidjo, the Beninese singer who speaks many languages. She works for UNICEF. She feels strongly about women's rights. She's an ambassador, and she's an incredible artist. But one of the things that makes her exceptional, it's the partnerships that she's forged. She's sung with just about every musician you can imagine. Salif Keita, Youssou N'Dour, Peter Gabriel, Ziggy Marley, the list goes on. She's on just about, well, she's not on every album, but you'll find her just about everywhere. And here's an example of someone who's working with networks. That's a key 21st century skill. You can't work alone in a silo. No man is an island. That's one type of interaction. The other is interacting with the world. What is the world? It's our home. And we have to respect it. It's not a vacant stage for our self-actualization. It's a living ecosystem. And we're destroying the planet. We have to go back and care for it. Someone who's done this is Wangari Maathai. Very interesting story, you know. She grew up on a farm where there was no school. And yet, because of her resilience and grit, she became a brilliant scholar. She suffered all sorts of adversity. She was imprisoned at one point. She was exiled. She went on to do a PhD in Germany. But most importantly, of course, was the work she did on ecology, right? The green belt, and really encouraging people to plant trees. She cared about the environment. And where it took her was the Right Livelihood Award and the Nobel Prize. Any country who has a Nobel Prize recipient should be proud. Wangari Maathai is an example of someone who interacted with the world in a mindful, caring way. And Africa is one of the places on the continent where we have a natural legacy to protect. You go to South Africa, you look at the Kruger National Park, that's 40,000 square kilometers. It's bigger than the country of Wales. You have an ecotourism industry that's growing at 13% a year. And look at the magnificent natural heritage you have in Kenya. These are going to be some of the most important natural resources in the entire world, so we have to protect them. We have to protect Africa and not turn it into a concrete jungle. Interacting with diverse tools and resources is the third type of interaction. So back in the day, we talked about Homo faber, who was a person who would yield a hammer or twist a screwdriver. A tool is just an instrument that you use. But now we're working with intelligent systems. So you're interacting with artificial intelligence. And you can use that to enhance whatever it is you're doing. An example of someone who's used tools in an interactive, diverse, and interesting way is the Malawian scientist, William Kamkwamba. You might have heard of him, but he used blue gum trees to create wind turbines. And he designed all sorts of new technologies using natural resources. He was a boy who, because of poverty and famine, couldn't get to school. But he went to the local library and discovered his passion for electronics as he taught himself. And because of his magnificent work with natural resources, the way that he interacted with those resources, even though they're quite limited, he's become a world-famous person, and he went on to take a degree at Dartmouth. So look at the resources around you and think, how can I interact with them in creative ways? There are two more vital competencies that we're going to look at. One is called transdisciplinarity, what we sometimes call interdisciplinarity. Thinking across subjects, making connections between areas of learning. This is important because the world is interconnected. The education systems that we've designed up until now have created the illusion that knowledge is packaged in discrete areas. But in fact, when you're in a work environment, everything is interconnected. And you need to make all sorts of creative links across subject areas. And you'll see that many of the people in the world who've done something special, who've gone somewhere, they're working across different fields. Here's one that I'd like to share with you. Johnny Clegg. He is a South African. He's sometimes called the White Zulu. So here's his story. He studied social anthropology at the University of the Witwatersrand. He went on to take a doctorate. He learned to speak Zulu fluently, which is quite unusual. It's unusual to find a white man who speaks either Xhosa or Zulu or Pedi or Tswana fluently. Not only can he speak Zulu, but he is completely enshrined in Zulu culture. He's considered an elder in the Zulu community. He mastered the Zulu dance and went on to become a musician, a rock star. He's someone who's bridged anthropology, academia, linguistics, music, and brought them together in this beautiful creative vision. So maybe that's something you'll do. You'll take those things that you're good at and you'll bring them together into something new. Transdisciplinarity. Now there's one more vital competence that we think you need to develop, and it's around communication. But more than just being a good communicator, you need to be able to communicate in a number of different ways. It's called multi-literateness. Literateness. Because when you're literate, you've mastered that communication tool. That's not just being bilingual or multilingual. It means understanding and being able to exploit financial literacy, scientific literacy, digital literacy. A multi-literate person is someone who can express herself or himself in different ways and touch different people accordingly. Knowing how to master different registers is vital. And someone who comes to mind is the actress Lupita Nyong'o, who you might know is Mexican and Kenyan. She speaks 4 languages. She's a young academic. She studied at Yale. She's also someone who has a passion for conservation, and she runs a campaign against elephant poaching. But more importantly than her linguistic skills and the fact that she has a broad repertoire of skills outside of acting, it's as an actress herself. She's able to incarnate completely different roles. So think of an actor, someone who's able to step inside different shoes and express different realities, and think that's the kind of thing that I need to develop to flourish in this world. So these are they, 7 macro competencies: lifelong learning, self-agency, interacting with others, interacting with the world, interactively using diverse tools and resources, transdisciplinarity, and multi-literateness. Those are 7 vital strands that we're going to develop together. If the piece of metal is left to rust in the field, no good will come of it. And the pond that lies stagnant needs the current to move its waters. And just as the breath of air that moves the barley across the planet gives movement, so in each heart is beating the sacred principle of life, what the Roman poets call the animus. Animus means soul. So what is it that drives you? What is that breath of life that pushes you to take on the world? What are your goals? That's the big question. And how are you going to take that sacred breath and allow it to drive you through those 7 macro competencies to become better scholars, better people, and to create a better world? I leave you with that question. Thank you.